We are beginning with the latest updates coming in on the International Court of Justice hearing Ukraine's application alleging violation of international laws by Russia. So Ukraine in its application has asked Russia to halt all military action in the country. The court reserved its order, and during the hearing, the Ukrainian representative said that this is not the first time that Ukraine has experienced first-hand Russian disrespect for international law. The representative also added, and I quote, "Putin lies and the citizens of Ukraine die." So that is how the Ukrainian representative argued in court, and all this is happening even as the third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine are likely, in fact, to begin soon. So there are, in fact, a couple of important questions that need to be addressed in the backdrop of the recent developments. Let me introduce our guests this evening. Joining us here on the program is Mr. Achal Malhotra, former diplomat and former ambassador, joining us on the program. Also is Vivek Narayan Sharma, Advocate Supreme Court and President of the Society for Criminal Justice. Very warm welcome to both of you gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to come across to you for questions. Before that, let's listen in to some inputs that we have on the hearing that took place in The Hague in the International Court of Justice.
Ukraine comes to this court because of a grotesque lie and to seek protection from the devastating consequences of that lie. The lie is the Russian Federation's claim of genocide in Ukraine. The consequences are unprovoked aggression, cities under siege, civilians under fire, humanitarian catastrophe, and refugees fleeing for their lives.
Okay, so we heard that it's a grotesque lie is what we heard the Ukrainian representative saying there. Ambassador Achal Malhotra, if I can begin with you in this case, I want to just know the fact that for a country that is already bearing the brunt of Western sanctions, which is meant to cripple the Russian economy, what would be the significance of this international judicial intervention in this conflict?
Well, Afrida, I think at this point of time, the Americans, the Europeans, and their allies, and of course, Ukraine, they're out to corner Russia to the extent possible. Sanctions is one part of it. International, isolation is another part of it. Maligning Russia's image is another part of it. The ultimate objective is to weaken Russia to the extent possible and project it as a villain and somebody who is creating so much of a problem for the regional and international peace. So you can see that while the Americans and NATO are not putting their boots on the ground, they are not sending their forces to Ukraine for fighting the Russian forces, but they are trying to do everything that is possible, which would ultimately hurt Russia or to force Russia to fight simultaneously at so many fronts. One, of course, is a military front within Ukraine and sanctions outside and this International Court of Justice. But the fact of the matter is, my other co-panelists probably will also tell you that the kind of process in the International Court of Justice usually is very slow. And I don't know whether they have invoked the charge of genocide, which I was earlier reading, probably they would be. Particularly if they have done that, it's very, very extremely difficult to prove that. International Court of Justice at the end of the day may issue an interim kind of directive to Russia to stop a war or stop military action. And then there have been many cases also when the states who are obliged to follow the rulings of the ICJ have, in fact, on grounds have declined, refused to do that. Over to you, Afrida.
Yes, yes. So in that sense, since you mentioned the fact about genocide, and let me just tell our viewers, for the benefit of our viewers as well, that Ukraine has filed an application with ICJ on the 26th of February to initiate proceedings against Russia under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So you were right there, Ambassador Malhotra, about this being invoked. I want to ask you, Mr. Sharma, that, this is a call to the ICJ, the call upon Russia to implore Russia to halt all military actions in Ukraine. Can the ICJ really play a role here?
It surely means ICJ at best can issue a decree or interim decree to the extent that they will direct Russia to stop this war situation right now. But at the same time, it is up to Russia whether they would want to follow that decree, because we have seen in the past also there have been so many precedents when the ICJ had passed certain orders, those were not really followed. And right now they are into a war situation, so I don't see that they are going to follow it.
Okay. No, I mean, in the fact of the matter is that the real cost of war here is borne by the common people. The lives of people on ground are irreparably, irreversibly damaged. Families are torn apart, and that seems, as a layman, grossly unfair. I mean, for whatever reasons that Mr. Putin might have, what we are seeing here are pictures of people left to fend for themselves. Ambassador Malhotra, on both sides, in fact, the human lives are impacted. Let's not forget that with the sanctions coming in and with its crippling effect, the common people in Russia is also bound to suffer, with so many enterprises and corporates withdrawing services. And Ukraine's damage is, of course, visible to us. In all of this, where exactly can, this humanitarian crisis that we are seeing of immense proportion, which exactly is the appropriate body to rein in the warring factions?
Well, we have at the helm of all this, we have the United Nations General Assembly. But what can UN General Assembly do? It consists of the same players, which have their own agenda, which they are pursuing outside. They at best pass certain resolutions, and those resolutions have also been passed not under Chapter 7, which is obligatory. So even the resolution is not obligatory. The Chapter 7 does have a provision for passing a resolution under which then the UN is expected, the member states of the UN are expected to act, which is militarily intervene in Ukraine to stop the war. But that's the extreme. And we must understand that the major players behind the entire game, which is America and Europe, they are not really interested in preventing the war for the time being, because it is working to their advantage. And how? It's very simple. As I said in my just now, that the ultimate objective from the West is to weaken Russia, weaken it in all respects. They have used this as a pretext to try and remove Russia from the global financial systems. They have imposed stringent sanctions, some of which may also have some impact on the Americans and the Europeans also, but that's bearable for them. They are not willing to fight on behalf of Ukraine, but are more than willing to supply arms and weapons, which again plays to the advantage of the arms industry controlled by Americans and the Europeans. And who is suffering? It's the poor people of Ukraine who are suffering right now. Ultimately, there would be an economic impact. Already the economic impact is seen globally. Look at the cost of the crude oil, which has gone up. We are also going to sooner or later get affected. Some of the sanctions which are going to be imposed on Russia may have an impact on India also in dealing with Russia. So the ramification is global. But the major, since the major players have decided to play it in a manner that, the bodies they are supposed to run or control, they are not going to do anything to make that body to act and, get this war stopped. And Russia has its own concern. It's debatable. Of course, it would have been better if Russia had not intervened militarily, or at least, even after launching its military offensive or the military operation, if Russia had confined itself to Donbas region, where, nobody is talking about it, but in the last 8 years, about 15 to 20,000 people have died because of the conflict between the separatists and the Ukrainian army. So still Russia had an excuse or a pretext. Although we all know why Russia is doing what it is doing, it's because of the possible membership of NATO being given to Ukraine. Over to you, Afrida.
Yes. That again is a very interesting point you made, and I'm glad you brought it up. The fact that now Putin has lost that valid cause, at least to a certain extent, the genocide argument in Donbas had some resonance. Now it has gone much beyond that. And Mr. Sharma, I want to ask you that, for anybody now it would appear that what use of an international treaty or a law or a pact, all these conglomerates that we have, these alliances, whether it's Quad or anything else, is meant to prevent this situation, isn't it? So that there is a sort of a understanding among nations and their competing interests. But when something like this happens, it just blows up that argument, Mr. Sharma.
I totally agree with you, because the moment we look at the things in the right perspective, while the international treaties provide certain civil rights, and then enforcement of in the local government level, enforcement of even criminal rights. But at the same time, whenever two warring countries are there, then in a scenario like this, there is no mandatorily following of the ICJ mandate, or even for that matter, even these Security Council meetings, they become faulty because they do not come with any resolution. So the one of the party which is in the conflict here is the permanent having permanent seat in the Security Council. So they are abstaining, and apart from that, even China is abstaining, and for that matter, even India has been not shown any concern with regard to these aspects, except for saying, all right, they should do this, they should do that. But at the same time, everybody is looking after their own interest. So of course, this calls for certain changes in future, that something at international level, what we evolve, it should become a mandatory exercise. And if suppose any country is falling out of line, then the international community should take a strong action. But this is not being happening here for various reasons, as the Ambassador Achal Malhotra had already briefed you about. There are certain economics involved in the matter. So therefore, based on those economics, these things are happening.
Yes, and Ambassador Malhotra, one last question to you about the whole sanctions argument, whether that can really be an impediment or a deterrent, because again, we see that it cuts both ways. The fact that now Russia is heavily leaning on China after all the withdrawals. For instance, if Visa has withdrawn services, Russia has already declared that they will now start using China's card system. And in some ways, even the corporates, the fact that they've withdrawn businesses from Russia will impact their business model. So it's not as if, like you also mentioned, the ramifications are global. But does that mean that even the whole sanctions argument is not really working when it comes to a situation of this nature, where Russia has gone ahead taking a unilateral decision, flouting, as Ukraine would argue, all international treaties?
Yeah, Frida, I think Russia had factored it in while it took the decision. And definitely President Putin has put national security as a top priority. And in any case, Russia is used to these kind of sanctions. It was already under certain kind of sanctions. It has already seen, we have seen unilateral sanctions being imposed elsewhere, even in Iran. And Russia had foreseen all this coming. And in this particular case, sanctions are likely to work as a double-edged sword also.
Yes.
Because that's the reason probably they are not putting any sanctions on the oil and gas. Although the new Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline operationalization has been put on hold. Because Europe is heavily dependent on Russia for its requirements of gas, and this is a winter season, and it may not be an easy job or task for them to find alternatives within a short span of time. Though ultimately it is also the objective of America to reduce Europe's dependence on Russia for gas to the extent possible so that Russia cannot use it as a weapon. And which it did some years ago when it had switched off the gas supplies in the thick of the winter. Yes, sanctions may work, may not work, but they are definitely going to have some impact on the global, economic system, because this will have, as I said, larger ramifications and larger dimensions. Only Russia is not going to suffer from it. Some will get directly, some will get indirectly. And but as far as Putin is concerned, I am sure he took all this, he factored it in, and he has made it a, he has decided to leave behind his legacy as a powerful president of Russia,
Yes.
who did
But
everything
who's paying
possible.
the price for it? The cost, the human cost is immense. It has really reached immense proportions, and the pictures speak louder than words. We've seen it all. And therefore, that is the reason now that we will have to wait and see what the International Court of Justice, which way it weighs in or what it says. That order is reserved for tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Achal Malhotra and Mr. Vivek Narayan Sharma, for giving us your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.